Good morning, everyone. Going to give folks a few more seconds to get logged in. Welcome to our COP30 Roundup, our virtual webinar report from COP. So this is for the Institute's snapshot of CCS and carbon management activities taking place at this year's COP. So as many of you know, COP30 is being held in Belém, Brazil, and it began on November 10th, and it's set to wrap up on November 21st, so on Friday, in fact. My name is Jess Oglesby. I'm the head of events here at the Global CCS Institute. And in just a moment, I'll hopefully be joined by my colleague, Ruth Gebremedin, who's the Strategic Communications Manager, as well as the Institute's Senior Global Advocacy Lead, Nora Alamir, who is here with us live from COP from Belém. So as I mentioned, COP concludes on the 21st, so there are a few days remaining. And with that in mind, this webinar will serve to be an overview of COP broadly, as well as a few insights up to date. We'll touch on some things relevant to this year's COP and provide some intel on the Institute's events and convenings and what we've been up to. So for those of you who are not familiar with the Institute, thank you for joining today. We are an international carbon capture and storage think tank whose mission is to accelerate the scale up of CCS, a vital technology needed to tackle climate change. Before we get started, some brief housekeeping as well. This webinar will be 30 minutes in length. If we have time, we'll try to get to some questions. So you can input your questions in the Zoom control panel. That's going to be at the bottom of your screen. Here we have a helpful little graphic. And if you miss any part of this webinar, a recording of the session will be posted on the Institute's website after the fact. So as I mentioned, we're joined by the Institute's Senior Global Advocacy Lead, who is joining us live from Belém. Welcome, Nora, and thanks for making the time.
Thank you, Jess. Nice to be here.
Yeah, we're glad to have you. So I'll just kick it off with the first few questions and then might turn over to our colleague Ruth. But so for people who are new maybe to the COP process, could you just kick us off with what is COP30 and how's it going for carbon management?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Jess. So COP30, I think many already know, is the world's biggest annual climate negotiation. COP stands for the Conference of the Parties. So this is what countries signed back in 1992, a UN climate treaty called the United Nations Convention on Climate Change, so UNFCCC. And once a year, all these countries come together to do three things. One is to negotiate the rules. So for how the world cooperates on climate action, things like carbon markets, transparency, finance, adaptation, mitigation, and any other items that countries feel need to be negotiated and discussed. The second is reviewing progress towards global climate goals, including the Paris Agreement, which was agreed in 2015. And in addition, announce new national or international commitments, so using the COP as a platform. So everything from methane pledges to industrial decarbonization alliance to forest declarations, etc. So COP is basically part diplomatic negotiation, part technical rulemaking, and part sort of global climate convention. So this year, COP, as you said, is in Belém.
Yeah.
So it's right at the edge of the Amazon, and this location really gives a sense of sort of moral weight, and you really feel it. It's hot, it's humid, it's rainy. People are uncomfortable. It was very difficult to find accommodation. So I think it is interesting for delegates to kind of be put out of their comfort zone, which is definitely happening here. So the temperature is definitely up in that sense. So it also feels quite different because the science is becoming more blunt and much more critical. So the IPCC chair opened the COP by saying that we've already reached 1.55 degrees Celsius warming on a monthly basis. And current national climate plans put us on a 2.3 to 2.5 warming pathway. So there's really very little patience for abstract ideas, and so everything is about implementation. So this really is called the COP of implementation. And although CCS and CDR are not in formal agendas this year, the issues being negotiated are actually what will determine whether CCS and CDR will be able, the level of which it can scale this decade. So we're not on the agenda, but many decisions will shape the outcomes for years to come.
Okay, that's Really interesting to hear a bit more about what is actually happening at the COP as well as what makes this year's COP different. Um, what are the big ticket items for COP 30 this year? What big picture themes are emerging that are especially relevant for carbon management?
Yeah, I think in terms of the big ticket items, I think the first thing is maybe just to give more of an overview on the space itself, just to give a more kind of a feeling for people before I jump into that. So on one level, there are the formal negotiations. So these are small rooms, negotiators and headsets, bracketed TV screens, and this is where countries hammer out the rules. And on the other level is the public COP, so the pavilions and the side events and the civil society action. So it's loud, colorful, and just to let you know, there's a lot of raw emotion in the space. So the protests are extremely loud and very visible. So we've seen very sort of dramatic protests from the indigenous community. There was a huge People's March, which is the first People's March since Glasgow. So there's a lot of that happening, bubbling in the background. And then also there's this sense of the elephant in the room is that the US isn't here. So it's not really talked about, but there is definitely an absence and a shift in dynamic in terms of how different countries are positioning themselves, how they're filling the gap that has been left by the US. The most senior US official that came is actually Gavin Newsom on a state level. Um, and I think the third thing to know is this is the 10-year anniversary of the Paris Agreement. So it's a real pressure test of multilateral climate cooperation and really reflecting on the Paris Agreement itself. So it's more charged, more political, and it really is where I think CCS and CDR will be able to kind of the enabling conditions for these technologies can be set here. So, in terms of the big ticket items, one of the main things we saw was the Belém Declaration for Green Industrialization, which was launched by 35 countries in addition to international organizations and initiatives, and was spearheaded by UNIDO. And this document outlines the environmental, economic, and social goals to reshape this global landscape and drive technological innovation, establishing a sustainable model for economic growth. So, the countries committed to share efforts and coordinate actions to accelerate the energy transition and modernize industry. So it is a step forward. And the signatories in the space are active in CCS and carbon management, such as Brazil, Germany, Indonesia, Sweden, the UAE, and the UK. So that's on sort of one of the kind of big things that happened last week. Another
Hmm.
thing just on the, yeah. So another thing on the negotiation side, we had, there's always a agenda fight, and this is something that we are seeing a lot more in COPs. It's becoming a recurring feature. So this happened in Baku last year, and then this year as well. In Bonn, but the presidency avoided it in COP, so they immediately started these negotiations with a kind of compromise on creating four special consultation tracks for the most politically sensitive issues. So this is the so-called Big Four, and it's what everyone talks about. It's where all the heads of delegation are. Those are the rooms you'll find them. So it really gives you a sense of where the center of gravity of the COP is. It is in that Big Four, in one of those Big Four rooms.
Yeah, so you mentioned the big four. Could we go through them together and can you tell me a bit about each of them?
Yeah, sure. So the first one is Article 9.1 of the Paris Agreement. So this speaks to finance for developing countries. So here, I think just important to know that since the signing of the convention in 1992, there has been a divide between developed countries and developing countries. So all of this is about kind of historical responsibility for climate change and that kind of thing. So this divide is still there today. So here, developing countries are united on Article 9.1 being a legal obligation for developed countries to provide predictable public finance towards developing countries. So this was something that was agreed in Paris, but at the moment they find, I mean, one is there's not enough funding coming through, and then the second thing was in Baku last year, there was a lot of reliance put on mobilizing private finance and other forms of finance, and developing countries really want to see that public finance is given. So this is particularly important because of a lot of a lot of aid is being cut in the world for, in different kind of in regions, including, the lack of US involvement. So this is becoming much more pressing, and developing countries really want to hammer out a decision on this. So this really matters to CCS because, without, the right amount of capital, emerging markets just cannot build, the storage hubs and infrastructure for CCS. So, while this is happening, developed countries are insisting to keep the structure under this Baku to Belém framework that envisions 1.3 trillion US per year. But again, this is anchored in mobilizing private finance, which developing countries do not want. So that's number one.
That's
The
the
second
first one. Yeah.
That's the first one. The second one is on NDCs. So COP30, as everyone knows, is the first COP since the third round of NDCs, which were actually due in February this year, but we saw a lot of NDCs come in just before COP. So in promising news, 86 new climate plans from 113 countries have been found to put us on track for 12% emission reduction over the next decade. And this is a big deal. I mean, even the secretary, the UN Executive Secretary, Simon Steele, was saying this is a big deal and we should, acknowledge this. At the same time, everyone agrees that NDCs are falling short of 1.5 degrees centigrade. So small island states are calling for a NDC response plan to close the gap, whereas China, India, the Arab group, and others are pushing back, saying that NDCs should stay 100% nationally determined. So this was part of the foundational structure when negotiating the Paris Agreement. I was a negotiator back then, and it was really focused on a bottom-up approach and countries deciding and determining how they want to contribute towards the goals of the Paris Agreement. So for CCS, and why this matters is, of course, higher ambition makes CCS and carbon removals more structurally necessary for heavy industry. And then the NDCs we are seeing this year that have come out, we're seeing a lot of new countries onto the field, specifically mentioning carbon management in some way, shape, or form in their NDCs. So Uruguay, Switzerland, and even the previous COP presidency, Azerbaijan, have joined the list. So we'll likely have a more detailed report out on the NDCs and CCS and those mentions probably in the future through the Institute.
Okay, and then we've got two more of the big four. We've got number 3 and 4.
Yes. Yes, it's just a lot. Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's a lot of issues.
A lot of moving pieces that COP.
Very a lot of moving pieces, but really they do have a really clear link for CCS. So third is the biennial transparency report. So these were decided in Paris and actually just got formally started at the end of 2024. So countries must report every 2 years on emissions, NDC progress, policies, finance needs, and technology. So here there's an issue because developing countries, again, back to the finance, are saying we don't have enough finance to even create these reports, let alone meet our NDCs and bring up projects from out of the ground. So they don't. So this is again linked to the finance and basically bringing the means. So for CCS, this is crucial because transparent reporting, MRV, is essential when we're talking about storage, transport, carbon crediting. So this would be, I think, a really positive step for. The last one is the most explosive one, actually. So the last one is the unilateral trade measures. So this is specifically on CBAM, the EU CBAM, and it's debated across multiple rooms and agenda items, mainly because it has no formal home. And developing countries. So you have the like-minded developing countries, which is sort of the hardest voice, the African group. They see CBAM as as a policy that they wish as protectionism and a policy that they don't feel they would like to open a dialogue in this negotiation and in the UN to discuss, whereas the EU insists it's domestic policy and not negotiable under the UNFCCC. And even this issue is being passed around to the WTO and then being passed back to the UNFCCC. So this is kind of what's happening. And for CCS, trade pressures make industrial decarbonization a competitiveness issue. So we heard in one of the side events from CCS Brazil that local industry exporters are looking towards CCS and being catalyzed into CCS in order to maintain market access in areas such as the EU because of things like CBAM. So the last of these big four is unilateral trade measures. So there is a proposal for an annual dialogue. So we'll see how that turns out this week.
So lots to cover with the big four. I'm actually going to, for the next few sets of questions, turn it over to my colleague Ruth Gebremedin, who is our Strategic Communications Manager at the Institute, but also a reminder to all attendees that we will try and take a few questions if we have time. So go ahead and put any questions you have in the Q&A box. Ruth, over to you.
Thanks, Jess, and thanks, Nora, for that debrief in the Big Four. It's quite interesting to hear about. When it comes to the negotiation, it's week 2 now. So what is, let's talk about the conventional items, so to speak. So the mitigation work program, for example, the global stock take, how is that shaping up? What could that mean for CCS and carbon management?
Yeah, thanks, Ruth, and welcome to the program. So the mitigation work program, I think, it was established in COP26, so that was in Glasgow, and it's to accelerate the ambition and implementation of mitigation. And it's really struggled since the beginning to move beyond political stalemates and just become a more technical space. So it really has a lot of issues that's actually linked to the global stock take. So when it comes to the global stock take, that paragraph 28, transitioning away from fossil fuels, where CCS is mentioned as a way to accelerate the transition, how to translate this into, ambition and action through the mitigation work program is, for example, one of the big issues of contention here. So at the moment, they're unable to resolve it. The main thing is they're still discussing whether to establish a digital mitigation program complementary to the global stock take. And the mitigation work program was and is an important part of the kind of advocacy efforts for CCS. We were involved in one of the investment focused dialogues. We did a whole day of knowledge sharing for delegates, and so even the future of the mitigation work program is in question, whether countries want to renew it. That decision will come next year.
And there were a lot of conversations around Article 6 ahead of COP, a lot of discussions percolating. Any news on that front?
Yeah, so Article 6 has been one of the most active technical negotiation tracks. So we do know that all the rules have been decided last year, but now it's more on how to actually, make this happen on the ground. So I think first Article 6.2, which is the bilateral carbon trading, discussions on the international registry. Many countries still also don't have clarity or capacity to participate in Article 6.2, especially developing countries who want support to build the MRV and accounting systems so they could track, their projects. So this is important because Article 6.2, we have the Norway and Switzerland bilateral on CDR under Article 6.2. So this could, this could be a way for, an increased engagement of carbon management projects. And then, there's Article 6.4, which is the bigger mechanism, and that's where a lot of drama is at the moment. So one is on membership in this supervisory body, and the members of the supervisory body is one question, and the term limits, etc. But another is on the integrity of the credits. So leakage, baselines, non-permanence. There's this proposed 100-year reversal risk standards, all coming under scrutiny. So I think, the bottom line is Article 6. We're not going to see a political breakthrough in Article 6 this year, but there is still steady technical progress. And, especially when it comes to matters of permanence, leakage, and accounting, these issues directly impact CCS, BECS, DAC, and other carbon management activities that can participate in an international, market mechanism.
Yeah. And all of these items are, I mean, I guess all tied to just transition at the end of it. I know they're obviously more detailed, but I think that's kind of what we all want to connect it to. So how is the just transition being shaped at COP30 and what does that mean for CCS? Are folks talking about, green jobs and how does that kind of fit into that broader narrative?
Yeah, so the COP30 presidency has made the Just Transition Work Program a priority for COP30. So, there are a few different things happening. So, options for an institutional arrangements, a mechanism to enhance international cooperation, policy toolbox as well, guidance. So, really, how to implement this just transition. But the issue is that just transition means something different to different people. So, even the definition of just transition I think, it needs to be settled. And in the CCS community, we're seeing folks leaning in to the just transition. How can CCS infrastructure create jobs, preserve industry, support transition? But more work, I think, is needed to back this up and, bring this in with, just transition and whatever principles come out of this discussion. So I think mainly just to mention one more, I think would be also the technology implementation program, which was established at the Global Stocktake, which has not been operationalized. So just to mention, negotiations are ongoing on that one too.
Yeah, a few more days left, so we'll see how that ties up. But I think before we discuss the Institute's activities and events, I kind of want to look at where COP31 might potentially go. I know that there was a bit of back and forth as to who will be the host. I think it was between Turkey and Australia. And of course, if there's no resolution, I think it goes to Germany. I think it goes to Bonn. So any clarity on that? Any discussions that you're hearing on the ground there?
Well, so yeah, the host of the next COP has to a diplomatic subplot. So, actually, this is reported to have reached the presidential level. So, Australia's prime minister wrote a letter to Erdogan before COP, urging, to, urging to host the COP when he only received a hard no. So definitely no progress there. There was also talk in having kind of a pre-COP in Turkey and then a COP in Australia, but again, that was rejected. So, but that being said, for the next COP, COP32, Ethiopia has been locked in, so for 2027, but 2026 is still unsettled. And actually on the ground, it's quite funny because we have sort of the Turkish pavilion and the Australian pavilion next door to each other, and then you also have the Brazilian pavilion, the Azerbaijan pavilion, and then the UNFCCC. So there's one kind of main area, and then there's sort of this. Competition on coffee and tea. So offering, free coffee and free tea to delegates. Australian pavilion historically has been very popular for its coffee, and now the Turkish pavilion are bringing the coffee and the tea. So, they're becoming prime pavilion hotspots. But I think the decision for this will be at the closing plenary, I think probably in a cover text. But nothing is guaranteed. And if a decision is not made between the countries, then it defaults to Bonn. And what we've heard is Germany definitely does not want to host a COP next year up in Bonn. So this is still a developing story.
Yes. Stay tuned. And I know that you'll have a report out in a few weeks' time. So I think by that point we'll know where it'll land. I think maybe let's pivot to events and convenings. I know that the Institute has had a few events on the ground, but maybe you could provide a bit of background on how this kind of functions at COP. There's the blue zone, there's the green zone. Where do the negotiations happen? And yeah, maybe just a bit of an overview.
Yeah, so our institute events happen primarily in the blue zone. We were invited to an event actually in the green zone, which we had to do sort of partly in Portuguese. But yeah, we've had a number of different events. I think we're going to go through them together.
Yeah. Maybe we can go to the next slide, Elena. Cheers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We have a lot of presence, different country pavilions, Qatar, China, the Brazilian Agency for Industrial Development through the Brazilian Ministry of Finance, IETA, of course. We covered a range
Yeah.
of different topics, finance policy, CCS opportunities. In addition, we also convened with Bingo, which is the business and industry constituency of the UNFCCC. There was a carbon management reception that was hosted by a local NGO called CCS Brazil with Isabella and Natalia, which the Institute supported. And various programming like that. I think we have different pictures from
Yeah,
the
I think maybe we can
events
go through
for,
the pictures. So this one, I mean, I think it might be worth mentioning for the AIDA Pavilion. We did kind of co-host this with our partners at the International CCS Knowledge Center. So as Nora mentioned, it
yeah.
was two sessions, one on project learnings, and the other one was on finance. And we had folks with the CCSA, Government of Alberta was there to kind of share their insights and kind of speak to maybe the commercial lessons from the first wave of carbon management projects. So that's kind of what was happening there. And then for financing, we had a lens from the carbon market, the Global Carbon Council rather was there to join us, and CCS Brazil as well, giving us the regional lens. You can flip through the photos, Elena, if you'd like, as we kind of go through these. And oh yeah, Nora, I think you were here the Carbon Management Challenge Open House. So maybe we can talk about this briefly. I think this was kind of a landmark gathering in the sense that you had national delegates with stakeholders from the private sector, ENGOs. What was the kind of feeling around that when you were planning it? And I mean, I want to ask you if people turned up, but clearly it was a good head count there.
Yeah, so this was actually really great. So the Carbon Management Challenge, for those who don't know, it's a global initiative that was launched in 2023, and now it features 24 different participating governments and to collectively work together to manage and store a gigaton of CO2 by 2030. So there's a website, carbonmanagementchallenge.org, if you wish to read more about the challenge. But we did we wanted to make use of being in COP. We usually have high-level ministerial roundtables at COPs. This year we had a more sort of intimate and informal setting on a working level with different governments. We had, the government of Brazil, Germany, the Netherlands, Angola, and we also included countries that were not necessarily in the carbon management challenge, but even just countries who want to dip their toes in carbon management and learn more. And we also had, different NGOs and members of the private sector that were there. And we really kind of talked about, on a high level, what is needed for the CCS and CDR community, and what we can do on a global level and at a global scale together. So yeah, it was a really
Yeah.
great event, and yeah, I think we all
Yeah.
we all made the most out of it.
Yeah, thanks. And I think we have you can flip through the photos, Ellen, if you want. Yeah, we were at the China Pavilion, so I think there were a few national pavilions that kind of highlighted CCS. It was in Canada as well, Qatar as well. The UK Pavilion featured carbon management discussions. Um, and I think something that was new for the Institute as well is we're embedded in the UNFCCC side event programming. I think typically there's one CCS event that features, and that's our good friends at the IAGHG usually host. Tomorrow you'll be moderating a discussion on hard to abate sectors, which is part of the official UNFCCC side event program. So that's definitely promising. I think we have a few industry associations that will be there with us tomorrow. World Steel will be there, the Global Cement and Concrete Association as well. CCS Brazil will also share their lens. Um, so it's been a busy time for carbon management. And I think aside from just the events, there's also been even dedicated booths on carbon management. There's a CDR pavilion, I think, this year. Um, the IAGHG have a booth exhibit booth 40 if anyone's on the ground if they want to visit any CCS related booths they're still there, they'll be there till the 20th. So it's been a busy time for CCS, I think, at COP, but we'll kind of see how it unfolds. And I think, as I mentioned, you'll have a report out in a couple of weeks. that will kind of highlight all of the items. Bingo is also something that you're a part of. I don't know if you touched on bingo yet, the business and industry NGOs, which have a daily stand-up meeting, providing folks on the ground a little bit of intel on what's going on with negotiations, and broader UNFCCC activities. And we've been asked to chair the meeting. I think, is it tomorrow, Nora, that you'll be at bingo?
Yes.
Yeah.
Bingo's tomorrow
So
and the side events tomorrow.
yeah, great. Um, but I think that's it in terms of events and activities. If you any final thoughts though, Nora, that you wanted to add on that front?
Yeah, I was just also just reading the different sort of questions that were on the chat. So I'm trying to maybe frame the final thoughts around these questions, so at least I can answer some. So I think, I think the question about CCS in these negotiations, there's one question about hard to abate sector and power and all this. Hard to abate sectors is the main CCS in the context of hard to abate sectors is what the GST decision says. So it's accelerating CCUS, particularly in hard to abate sectors, which shows this hard to abate sector piece is more palatable for the UNFCCC, for the global audience when it comes to CCS. I think that's one thing. I think another piece is this just transition question and how we can, merge CCS into the global conversation in such a way that it, considers, of course, environmental aspects and social aspects and economic aspects, all in sort of a balance. And I think that's sort of what will, what can, really help not just with the delivery of the technology, but also the acceptability of the technology, especially in these kind of spaces, very heated, very, CCS is a relatively small component compared to all the other things that are happening. When you're talking forest, you're talking adaptation, you're talking finance. CCS plays a specific role, so I think we need to, make sure our role is very defined and productive and constructive. Um,
Yeah.
and
Yeah,
Yeah, I think
maybe we
just
could
on the Belém
yeah.
Declaration, just because there was a question, CCS not mentioned in the Belém Declaration, but I think definitely we will start some conversations with UNIDO to see how we can support the declaration, and of course, different countries that already are active in CCS, are already involved in it, and CCS does play a part in the green industrialization movement. So.
Yeah. Do we want to take one more? What's the sentiment on the ground? Are participants willing to get on with what needs it? Yeah, I guess maybe I know you already touched on
Yeah.
that, but what is the
I think
sentiment?
this answers, there's two actually. There's one also about any consensus that cops should seize. So sentiment on the ground. So actually, I have to say that I mentioned this in the beginning, but it's very hot. It's very humid. People are very, I think, not very comfortable in the kind of temperature of the room. Uh, I think also there is a sense because the US delegation is not here, although it's not being spoken about, I do think there is an impact on this in some way. Um, yeah, I think the absence is being felt, but not necessarily being communicated. And I think I wouldn't say there's a resignation among participants, but I think there is definitely some kind of fatigue when it comes to the way these negotiations are being done. There's a lot of political deadlock. There's a lot of emails coming out every day about some kind of protest. There's been a lot of police activity outside of the not non-violent, but a lot of police activity outside. Um, so I think there's been a lot of raw emotions are happening. At the same time, something I think there needs to be something that can. I think something needs to transform in order for these cops to kind of evolve to the next stage. But I would say that being said, it still is where every country in the world comes, except for the US this year, but many Americans were there on different levels. But every country in the world is represented, and it's still amazing to see how we're all working together towards climate,
Yeah.
towards the climate. So
Yeah.
so
And
not giving up yet.
And speaking of working together, there's a question here talking about the attention that CDR is getting at COP. I guess in comparison to point source like CCUS, do you find that this year that CDR is kind of the getting a little bit more attention than CCS? And is there, I mean, is there a good or bad impact about that, or is it just kind of, whatever gets us there
Yeah,
in
I
terms
think
of conversation
CDR,
rather?
yeah, I think CDR, it works, it has its own sort of niche in the COP, and even just, I think, in the global conversation. So definitely CDR is there. There was a high level event yesterday on CDR. And I mean, I wouldn't say it's getting more or less traction than CCS, but it definitely has its own, it has its own space, and it can thrive, in its space. And
Yeah.
CCS is part of CDR anyway, so.
Yeah. Okay. Great. And one last question about the recap. Yes, there will be a summary at the that Nora will author in a few weeks' time. So we'll have that up on our website. I'm afraid that's all the time we have today. Thanks, Nora, for all that for all the info that you've shared. And we'll keep an eye on what takes place during COP in the days to come. If you're interested in learning more, we'll have a COP30 report, as I just mentioned, in the weeks to come. And the Global Status of CCS report is always a great resource for all things CCS as well, related to CCS policy or project development. You can find that on our website. If you're on socials, feel free to follow us. We're on LinkedIn. Global CCS Institute is our handle. If you have any outstanding questions, you can reach out to us at info@globalccsinstitute.com. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruth. If Yuho hasn't gone off,
Yes.
I'll just also add to the CDR question is
Yeah.
there was actually a lot of CDR startups as well here, and they were talking about how to create policies to help CDR startups link
Okay.
onto bigger projects such as Longship or any of the big projects, and how that can kind of stimulate the kind of startup sector of CDR. So a lot of good conversations on CDR that we saw. I just wanted to mention that. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for mentioning. Good food for thought. Thanks, Nora. Thanks,
Thanks.
everybody.
Bye.
Cheers. Bye.